things as we see later. There are some ecoregions and things that just barely skirt the county line. So I don't really like to go by political boundaries necessarily. But if it's only on this side of the line, that's only something that maybe if you want to grow or of interest to this talk here. But generally speaking, we'll be talking about this area spilling over into maybe some of the neighboring counties. But okay.
I think you'll have to use the advance on the screen.
You can't just click it here. It's not okay. Okay. So I'm going to start with just a little experience I had in August here. A friend of mine does wetland delineations, and he came to me and said, "Hey, we should go check out this property that I did a wetland delineation on. The property that's going to be developed into a big, large housing development, as you're probably familiar with in this area here." And okay. And he had told me that he had identified this cranefly orchid on it, this color, which is, as you can see on the map, a pretty wide-ranging most limit right here in Montgomery County. I wouldn't say it's common in the county. It does need kind of suitable habitat, usually just some nice, moist, semi-shaded, moist but well-drained slopes, usually above some streams or ravines. And it's basically a winter grower, so it has these leaves in the winter time, and then it will go dormant in late spring, and then in midsummer it'll send up flowers. When he was out there, it was early August, and so he saw only the flowers. He recognized it. There's no leaves at the time. It was just kind of a habitat out there, really beautiful. It's sad to think that all this area around this is just going to be cookie cutter homes soon, but it was he's not my friend that was doing this. He's not really a plant person, but he knows something. So being that the tipularia was there, the cranefly orchid, that kind of caught my interest, because usually that means that there's probably some other good stuff there. So we went exploring and basically found the tipularias. That's basically what they look like when they're flowering, just these bloom spikes coming up out of the ground. They're not really, I mean, I think they're beautiful, but a lot of people wouldn't find them showy like some of the orchids that I think a lot of people would like to grow with big gaudy flowers. But they're beautiful nonetheless. And they were really wanting to, he and his girlfriend were really wanting to salvage some of these things, but we started walking around more and more, seeing them by the hundreds back there, so we couldn't necessarily get them all, and I kind of convinced them that we can't save everything, unfortunately, and this is not really a very common one. But you can see just the masses of the flowers, the bloom spikes in this little area here of this orchid. They dug a few up just to go put somewhere else. And then started looking around more, and then came across this guy here. This is kind of an indicator species for a bagel type environment. Bagels being kind of usually basically really clean water originating from a seepage or a spring, and usually it's shaded. Usually dominant trees are like our like sweet bay magnolias, tupelos, a variety of just other hardwoods. But these little guys here, these Apteria, nodding nixies as they're called, are they're a mycoheterotroph. They have no chlorophyll. They just basically tap into the mycorrhizae and the roots of particular plants, and basically kind of pirate nutrients from the tree that they're that mycorrhizae has formed a partnership with. So they used to be called parasites. It's not technically a parasitic relationship. It's kind of what's called mycoheterotrophic, but really neat plant nonetheless. Again, no chlorophyll in them, so they're reliant totally on those nutrients that they just kind of glean from their host tree via the mycorrhizae. And these are only just about like 3 inches tall, really tiny. You have to really look for them, but with the camera flash, they kind of glow a nice purple color. But yeah, you only find this in some really high quality habitats. So this was kind of a neat thing to see and made me think that we're going to see some more good stuff. So I'm sorry. Yeah, usually you start seeing these pop up in about midsummer, and they'll continue through. I saw some today up in Nacogdoches County. So they continue into winter before it gets too cold, then they'll die back. But you can see here, they're kind of sporadically found throughout the coastal plain in the southeast. But I didn't realize till I got back that they've never actually been recorded from Montgomery County yet. So this is a new county record. Otherwise, they just found in San Jacinto County, and that was the westernmost known limit. These maps that I'll be using throughout the presentation here, these all come from the BONAP website. Basically, you can look up any plant genus, and it'll show you the range of all the species based on their herbarium specimens. It's not necessarily accurate. I mean, I know there's plenty of plants that don't always match all these colored county records here, just because nobody's officially documented it. But
What website is that?
BONAP, BONAP.
Thank you.
And yeah, it's a really handy reference if you just want to see the ranges of these things. But yeah, so that's a new county record. So I went back another time and collected some Preston herbarium specimens, and that'll officially document it. And eventually this county will be colored in once it all gets through the system here. But yeah, it's just neat that we have all these westernmost limits of these eastern plants, you know. So I'll go a little further, and I see the form of orchid foliage, a different orchid, a little bit more interesting than the cranefly orchid that we saw earlier. This is one of the bog orchids, Platanthera, and it had already flowered. You can see the inflorescence up there, the seed capsules that are forming on those. There's 2 of them on 2 long stalks up there. We're looking at these kind of broad paddle-shaped leaves here, and this tends to grow in these shaded bagel environments. And started looking more and more, and these were quite abundant. Here's a picture of what they look like in flower. Again, they're not these ultra showy tropical things that you see in orchid nurseries, but to me, they're just absolutely beautiful. Very tiny flowers, really intricate detail on them, and yeah, only specific to these bagel environments, really clean water, only growing in these really perpetually moist areas. So these areas never dry out. So this orchid wouldn't be found in an area that's only seasonally moist. But we kept going, and suddenly it turned into basically the largest patch of this species of orchid I've ever seen at one site. I mean, there were hundreds of them just in an area that was about half the size of this room here, which was quite amazing. It is a widespread species, and it does get, there are some records a little bit west of here, but still, again, it's very habitat specific. So just don't let that fool you that you see all those colored in counties all the way across the eastern half of North America there. It is still not, I wouldn't call it common, and it's not really rare either, but I would consider it still important. Yeah, and then I started walking around more, and I had just collected seeds of this in a bog in Angelina County, so I recognized it. This is a pretty rare orchid. This is another species of Platanthera, like the one that we saw, but this is Platanthera cristata. Show you the flowers in a second here. And this one, basically, there's only a couple populations of this left in the state, and we found a new one here that's about to be destroyed. There used to be 2 populations as recently as 5 years ago up around the Willis area, but Joe Lidjo, the author of Wild Orchids of Texas, if you had that book, he gave me the coordinates of the sites to go check them out because he hadn't been there in about 5 years, and one of them is totally destroyed, and the other one is just really overgrown just from the land just not being managed properly. Has Chinese tallow and other things just clogging it out. But this has been, I do a lot of orchid conservation work, and so I go through basically all around the state collecting seeds and mycorrhizae from the roots, since that's required for the seed germination, and work with Longwood Gardens up in Pennsylvania. They basically have a lab and wonderful staff and facilities. So we just send them all these species of conservation concerns. And so it was nice to find a new population. And when we were there, the fruits that you saw on the previous slide there, they were perfect. So couldn't have gone better just to get this population backed up somewhere else before this all gets destroyed. These were all taken at a different site. But yeah, you can see basically westernmost limit again, because we're running out of that kind of eastern woodland habitat here in Montgomery County before it shifts into the post oak savanna here. But again, you can see all the counties that are shaded in East Texas, but don't let that fool you. A lot of those are historic records that no longer exist. I would say only Tyler County, Angelina County, Jasper County, and Montgomery County are the only sites that we know of still existing today, and just 1 or 2 sites per each of those counties. So yeah, before we thought that it had been extirpated in Montgomery County from those 2 Willis sites I mentioned, but now we found this other one, but it's going to be destroyed. But we got those genetics backed up somewhere else, and Longwood Gardens will propagate them, grow them out. They'll come back here, and we'll plant them somewhere. Maybe involve you guys in the process. So yeah, they're the fruits of this. So basically, we'll just collect all those little pod-like things there. We collect them while they're still green. Normally, naturally, those would brown and dry up and basically crack open. They shed their seed, which looks like dust. But they propagate them in the lab and basically in petri dishes, basically, or test tubes. They want the seeds before they actually dry. If they just sow those green seeds, they germinate instantly, and they found that they make more vigorous plants than if they use the dry seeds and go through natural dormancy processes and things like that. These were perfect, so couldn't have gone any better. And so yeah, they're my friends. Tim, who's the guy who did the wetlands delineation, and his girlfriend Ileana, as we're rescuing orchids from this place, collecting seeds, and we also pulled a bunch up. I do not recommend harvesting orchids. It depends on the species. Some are easy to actually transplant, other ones are not, but you need suitable conditions for them to go into. You can't just stick them in a pot and expect them to live, or put them in your garden. So I've done a little bit of trial and error through my years, but I also know plenty of people who have done it successfully with the various species. So I know who to consult on how to do this the right way. So if anybody does know of a site that's going to be destroyed, just let me know, and we can help you out with the best way to salvage them. So another cool thing that we have here in Montgomery County, you all are probably familiar with the sable miner, just a regular, it's called a variety of things, dwarf palmetto, blue palm. It's very common in the understory of floodplain forests here. But up at Lake Creek Preserve, you get these, many of you may have seen this if you've been there, you get these trunking individuals here. And these have people have pondered these for a long time. There are similar plants in Louisiana that get sometimes referred to as sable Louisiana for these short trunking individuals. But there was also down in Brazoria County, there were these things that everybody was calling the Brazoria palms for the longest time, that also have these trunks, some of them getting quite large, other ones staying kind of shorter, like the ones that we see here in Montgomery County. And some folks several years ago actually did the molecular work and found that these Brazoria palms were actually a hybrid between sable minor, the little trunking ones that you see everywhere, at least the normal form, and sable palmetto, which occurs today about like Alabama to Florida to North Carolina. But we know it used to live here because there's fossil pollen in our sediments here from the Ice Age. So it used to be a pretty common palm here, but eventually it migrated eastward to its modern day range. But for whatever reason in Brazoria County, a hybrid population just basically stabilized and retained the genetics of the sable palmetto, which is no longer here in its pure form. And so you get, when you see these down, and you can see these down the Brazoria preserve down there, you'll see some with short trunks and some that are actually like 20, almost 30 feet tall. And it's all just reflecting the different variation between some wanting to be shorter like the sable minor parent and other ones wanting to be tall like the sable palmetto parent. The ones here in Montgomery County and the ones in Louisiana, they all look a little different when you view them all as a whole. And so it's thought that maybe they may reflect some other hybrid. It was long thought that these were actually a hybrid between sable minor and sable mexicana, which exists in South Texas today, just obviously due to proximity. So it was interesting to find that that was not the case, and it's actually something nobody expected with this parentage from further east. So you never really know what's going on with these plants until you really look at them on a molecular level. It's really all this DNA work is really changing how we see these things. It's changing a lot of names, which is upsetting a lot of people, but this is how we learn things. And so there's actually a botanist from Cornell University who's going to be coming here in December. She's going to be getting some DNA from our trunking plants here, as well as all sorts of other mysteries we've been finding all throughout the coastal plain of the southeastern US in this sable minor complex. And hopefully she's going to make more sense of this, because they've only looked at these Brazoria County things. So it'll be interesting to find. We may have a new species here in Montgomery County. And so going back, I mean, we just really need to look at the ecoregions, and you probably have seen some of these ecoregion maps that Texas Parks and Wildlife has on their website, and other folks do too. These are all very generalized. You need to really take it. It's a pretty good, accurate representative generally. Things don't always conform to those lines, kind of like with the political boundaries. Nothing is always going to be perfect with these things. It's going to be more kind of a gray area along there. Some that may be a little bit sharper if like the geology changes very abruptly there. That can definitely dictate the transition of an ecoregion. But you can see basically where we sit there, that kind of brownish color, that's all basically considered the piney woods there. So that's generally what's deemed to make up most of Montgomery County. That's not that doesn't mean that there aren't a mosaic of other habitats in there other than just piney woods. Like there's that orchid seepage bay gall that runs through the piney woods there. So you get these little microhabitats mixed in, but generally the pines were the more dominant things in the upland forests here. But you can also see just on the edge, the western edge of Montgomery County there, you got the basically the two blue zones there that are lapping up the western edge there, and then the kind of a white gray zone there. So that's basically the post oak savanna is the blue, and then that strip that kind of splits it in the middle is all kind of blackland prairie. Again, I found blackland prairie remnants all throughout either side of the that little strip there in the post oak savanna region, but generally speaking, that's kind of where it dominates the most there. So that's why it's kind of indicated on the map. And you can find blackland prairie remnants all throughout Montgomery County too, especially in the western half and the northern portion there bordering Walker County there. We'll see some of those a little bit later. And there's different, there's level 3 and level 4 ecoregion maps here that refine things a little bit more here. it's really just it's really just getting out, and you can use this as a guide just to kind of know where you fit in the grand scheme of things here, but there's no replacement for just getting out hiking and exploring and really understanding what this really means. We'll go through a few of these here, like the Blackland Prairie. This is one that's up in the Sam Houston National Forest. That's kind of like a perfect picture for the Pines and Prairies chapter here with both of them represented. This one was, and most of them that are around these days were still, these aren't just like perfectly preserved prairies here. These were used for agriculture at some point in history, but at least the ones in Sam Houston National Forest, they are maintaining these now and getting rid of exotic grasses and other things that have infiltrated these and burning them on a regular schedule. And there's a lot of these that are looking quite spectacular in terms of the diversity of plants that are there. And so with the Blackland Prairies, that's just kind of taken from the ecoregion maps. This is basically where they dominate here. These two kind of bands across the state that conform to the all the tertiary, basically all the sediments that basically create that arc around wrapping around East Texas from the north going down to San Antonio and wrapping around there. But again, you do find all these little patches of Blackland Prairie and other areas in between there. So just a generalization. And gets the name Blackland Prairie. It's kind of hard to, doesn't really look really black there, but you can see on this kind of erosional feature here, the little bit of the soil that's exposed here. It is a dark color. Some areas it can be pretty black, other areas it can be, it's not at all black. It may be just a little bit gray. It has different compositions depending on where you are. So you can't just go by the color, but it has a lot of organic material, especially from the years and years of fires burning process. All that carbon just gets integrated in with the sediments there. There's usually a little bit of alkalinity to it, but not fully like acidic or anything. And a lot of these plants do like that kind of slightly alkaline soil here. You can see some of the Texas bluebells and eustomas coming up here. Some other cool stuff. And you get other things like the Liatris aspera. These all came up in mass one year right after a fire. This year, they just came up pretty pathetically because all the other ground cover filled in after that. They're very sensitive to that sort of thing. So they really are at their best right after fire, but they'll persist in their just kind of as a rosette down there until they get fire again and breathe a sigh of relief and bloom again. So fire, yeah, as I mentioned earlier, fire is an integral part of it. It's actually my property here. I have one burning all the time. Who doesn't? Yeah. That was up, that's actually right on the Montgomery County, up on the northwestern portion of Montgomery County. But another cool thing that we have in the Blackland Prairie, but it also spills over into some of the other ecoregions like the Potomac Savanna, is this Echinacea paradoxa. And you can see on the map there, we got two different forms of Echinacea paradoxa. There's this yellow form, Echinacea paradoxa, which is found up in Missouri, northern Arkansas there, indicated on the map. And then this other form, which is this kind of dark pink, light purple color, Paradoxa drydi neglecta, which is basically that little population in the southern portion of Oklahoma. And then you can see there's a color, Montgomery County color in there. We've since found some more records of this. I found one this year in Colorado County. I found some in Grimes, Brazos, and Washington County. So it is out there. I think a lot of people in the state for Echinacea atrorubens in the second here. They are kind of similar, and I kind of wonder if they're not the same thing. It is kind of a jump to have these two different forms being considered the same species, even though the foliage is similar. The foliage is also similar with atrorubens too. They're the way they distinguish them beyond the color is the length of the rays. What a lot of people would mistakenly call petals on these flowers here. So basically, Echinacea paradoxa rarity neglected has rays that are basically well over 3 centimeters, 4 centimeters long, whereas atrorubens, which is the one on the other side, you see the range map for that, has basically rays that are under 35 millimeters. So, and you find plenty up in the field, they're right on the edge and intermediates and populations of both. And so I think that if there really are two different things, they're either been hybridizing, mixing over time, or it may just be one variable thing. I heard that someone is going to be looking at these on a molecular scale, so hopefully we'll know more, but I kind of question whether or not this paradox of rarity neglected is really a thing, as opposed to just a longer rayed form of the atrorubens. But we will see. But it would be nice if it is something cool, so we can claim that as something unique to our area. Another neat thing, I helped with a survey with these around the state. This Helianthus occidentalis variety, Plantageneous Schinner sunflower. This variety, so Helianthus occidentalis is basically that entire, all the shaded in areas in that entire map, but variety Plantageneous specifically is the Texas records, Louisiana records, and I think some of the southern Arkansas records only. So it's basically that stuff with the limit of it. And it's common in some areas, but it's few and far between. Otherwise, between sites, probably was more common before the land was altered in the area here. But it's one of those UICs and yellow composites that a lot of people will look at this and think it looks like all the other ones that you see out there, all the different flowers and relative coreopsis and various relatives that all just have that generalized yellow composite flower look. But it is, if you kind of get beyond your fears of trying to sort these out, this one is pretty easy to identify with. You can see the long, tall inflorescences, up like 4 or 5 feet tall, with little to no actual little leaves on those stems. Basically, all the leaves are kept at the base there, just a little rosette that looks like name means how it resembles a plantain. And the leaves are actually very smooth too, unlike most other sunflowers that have hairs and have a rough feel to it. Often pretty easy to identify, just even when it's not in flower, you'll see these colonies that still in the first one will form these patches of those rosettes that you see up there. So Montgomery County is not shaded in here, but I have found it here recently. Specimens of that, so that will eventually be colored in once those get entered. But yeah, it seems to be in our area more common, like Waller County, like around the town of Waller, and down into Austin County. I've seen a lot, and then over in Newton County too, right on the Louisiana border. There's quite a few there. But interesting one. And a lot of these things you can find, we're finding just out in these pristine habitats, these roads that vary in it. And you can see here all these great things. You can see where the road kind of cuts in at the top of the screen there, and then you got the fence line over there on the right, and there's like no diversity over on the other side of the fence line due to grazing or mowing or whatever, but everything is kind of sandwiched between the fence and the road. You know, some great sites like this with a lot of cool prairie plants, just reflecting what used to be everywhere there until agriculture came in. And these roadside programs are often unfortunately short-lived because roads get widened and various things happen due to us humans. So these things are like gold when you do find these, and need to get these documented. Some of my friends with TxDOT, we've been trying to find ways because they do a good job at actually kind of if there's really significant plants there, they do try to, you've probably seen some of their no-mow signs and some of the more significant sites here, but they really can't get to everything. And there's still problems with their contract mowers not paying attention to the no-mow signs and things like that. So it's kind of an issue that hopefully we can make some progress with. Oh, sorry. I'm going to move around too much. Another kind of weird one. This is kind of related to the Garas, or the former Gara that used to former name its own opera now, but this one got moved to Stenosyphon linifolius. Use a lot of Latin names here. I know a lot of people don't like Latin names, but you can learn Latin names. They're not that scary. It's I think they're easier than common names. I can't keep up with the common names that everybody uses. When I moved from Florida to here, I had to relearn common names because they're totally different here, which is a problem with common names. And even here, people have different common names for the same plant. So, but as you can see here, there's issues with the Latin names too, but at least you have a paper trail because these are all documented somewhere along the way. So whichever one you do want to use, generally you can, whoever's on the receiving end of that information can figure it out. It's up to them if they want to be a snob and say, oh no, this is the accepted name, that sort of thing. I'm not really like that, but anyway, this is just kind of a one of the evening primroses that takes on a unique form. You can see in the upper right there, just these really long branching stems that have these little tiny flowers along them, very different than most of the other evening primroses. You can kind of see it in the flowers when they look them up close, but it's just a really unique member of the that whole group there, and that's very. Yeah, and there is disagreement on that right now, just because it's kind of a new thing. So, yeah. So. But yeah, here's where it naturally ranges predominantly through the plain states here, but you can see down there where the arrow is, we've got basically Walker County and Grimes County shaded in. That's where it's been documented, but I have found it in Montgomery County too. Granted, just over the county line, but again, we have that problem with splitting hairs with political boundaries. But nonetheless, it is some of the better quality blackland prairie sites. So it's the more you're looking, more you can find it. But yeah, it still is separated by the geology, the post-oak savanna region there. This little area, Montgomery, Grimes, and Walker County there. So it is a neat little kind of separate population from that main Central Plains range. Monarda lindheimeri, this is kind of a neat one around here. I'm actually working with the USDA on the seed banking project for this, just because they kind of deem some of these things that are just very localized as things that are of conservation importance, and want to get these things, get seeds preserved from different populations so they can have as much genetics as possible, basically preserved in these biorepositories. And so this is something that becomes more abundant, like around College Station area, Brazos County, Grimes County. But it does, I've got a range map here. You can see it does range into this area here. I've seen it both in like on sandstone outcrops and up around the Brazos County area, but then I've also seen it in blackland prairies. I've seen it in pinelands. It's not too habitat specific, but still it's and it can be common in some of these areas, but still this is basically the only area it grows where you see these colored counties here. Just spills over into Louisiana a bit, but still it is something to of conservation concern, despite what looks like a pretty broad range. And then we're also finding in some of these populations, you get some of these varying degrees of pink and purple. We do have Monarda fistulosa coming in from the east there. So we're not sure if these are actually hybrid populations or something else. There was a pink one described from this area called, I think, Scabrifolia a long time ago, that then got sunk back into fistulosa, but there's a little bit of interesting morphological distinctions with these kind of pink ones. So someone up at Columbia University is actually, I sent them DNA from a number of these here. So they're going to be trying to figure that out, if there is this little cryptic species among these populations, or if it is just color variation within Lindheimeri or fistulosa. So we may have, again, something new in our area, or we may not. So beyond a lot of these kind of localized things, Texas Parks and Wildlife does track per county a number of plants of conservation concern due to their rarity, or just yeah, just basically due to rarity within that on a county by county basis. And so this is basically it. I mean, there's many more on the list that may be even rarer than these, but there are different reasons for tracking them, like maybe those really rare species are in like a preserved land, like Sam Houston National Forest, in an area that's getting maintained, as opposed to maybe some of these that are on private land, which may have an iffy future. So, but yeah, there's just basically various reasons for them to end up on this list here. We'll go through some of these here. The first one, Onosmodium helleri, is actually a species from the Edwards Plateau, from the Hill Country area. But then we have this one record from range not clear, but we have the, but yeah, they're basically, so basically the helleri from the Hill Country looks very similar to this one here, which is around this area. Some of you may have seen this before in some of the prairies or roadsides. It really sticks out like a sore thumb in like April or March or April, when it's up and flowering like this. It's really, it gets covered with these kind of silvery hairs, and just is a very distinctive plant. It's in the borage family, so it has these what are called scorpioid inflorescences that kind of curl and unfurl, and each one of these little tubular things are the individual flowers. So basically, though, that one at the base is the first one to flower, and they'll just keep going sequentially, and this will unfurl as it goes, eventually becoming pointing straight outward when you get to the very last flower there. But this is kind of the cool state that they're in when they're all curled like that. Oops, wrong way. And there's just kind of a head-on shot of the flowers, the way they're organized, and just all those hairs. It almost looks more like some creature rather than a plant. And just very unusual flower structure. They're very, the flowers are very closed at the tip. There's just that little opening there that pollinators somehow get into. I remember reading what pollinates it, but I forgot. Second species, I haven't actually seen this one yet. You can see it's got kind of a weird scattered distribution around the state. Paronychia cetacea, it's just a little thing probably most people would just walk right by and not find very interesting. Grows in kind of sandy or sandstone areas. It's an annual, so it basically grows for several months and then disappears, and relies on seeds for rejuvenation. But it's one I'd like to track down one day just so I can see I've seen it. One of those things a lot of people just probably wouldn't care about, even though it is important ecologically. Third species, Amorpha paniculata. You can see the range there: Arkansas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, and Texas. Another pretty habitat-specific one. You'll find these in some of the bay gull seepages and bogs, both in full sun and pretty deep shade. It's one of the lead bushes, if you're familiar with some of the other species that we have around here. But this one is just a much larger statured plant, really big leaves, and then has these big branching inflorescences. This whole branch right here is about 6 feet long here. And so each of those flower spikes is about like that long. It has these just really tiny flowers that are just kind of a dark purple color. With little yellow anthers sticking up the end there. Kind of a scraggly plant and habitat, but I've seen it cultivated where people will prune it and it'll actually make a nice full plant. Another one of those little insignificant plants that's tracked by the state, Astragalus radii. It's a little vetch that is an annual. I couldn't find my photos of it, but putting a rare specimen up here. Another thing nobody cares about, but probably me. And then Physostegia corellii, one of the obedient plants. You guys have probably seen some of the more common species you see along the roadsides here. And not familiar with the obedient plant, I get the name because it actually basically reposition the flower. You can basically turn one and move it to the other side and it'll stay there. It's obedient, but sometimes you can find broken ones that won't cooperate. This particular species here is very sporadic in where it occurs in Louisiana, Texas. Montgomery County record no longer, unless someone finds another one back on some private land somewhere, which is always possible. But for now, it's just considered extirpated from this county here. There's only a few sites remaining out near Austin and out near Del Rio and then Louisiana. It is actually around in cultivation, so it's a great plant to grow. It will sucker and fill in a moist area in the garden. It doesn't need moisture, but it will take a little bit more dryness. It just won't be as vigorous, but it's about 5-6 feet tall, really spectacular when it's flowering, and definitely worth growing. And then I think this was the last state track species, Rhododon ciliatus. This is an annual also. It's in the mint family. You can actually crush it, so you can get a little minty smell out of it. But look at the range there. It's got that kind of weird line, and that's just following the sandy geology there across East Texas. You kind of strip them on that island of the real deep sands that the species really likes. In some areas, it can be really abundant where the habitat is just right. In fact, I think I got another photo. Yeah. This is actually a sand lot in just outside of Hempstead. You know, Hempstead and 290, you get up where there's like the only exit where this little Jack in the Box. Park of the Jack in the Box, this is right next to it. And you can see over there on the other side, that's the sale sign. Be very indebted to you because there's lots of wonderful plants probably going to get destroyed by whoever buys it because it's some prime commercial land. 290 internet. A bunch of very localized plants here beyond the rhododon. And then we have weird things. This is up for debate, but Yucca free manioc. Named a long time ago, and then one that considered as a very Yucca Louisiana, a pretty common one that you see in picture both of them side by side. It's kind of hard to tell, but Louisiana is in the foreground here and free manioc in the background. Basically, Louisiana is a more common form in the silver edges. Whereas free manioc doesn't. The inflorescence have very different branching. The flowers have morphology. And just especially at this side here, side by side, I mean, there's plants. All the work combining these two species of Louisiana result again, you get the humpers and splitters here, but I think it's good to recognize free manioc as a good answer. Work and kind of confirm this a little bit better in the near future here. But it does kind of crop up mainly in this area, through a bunch of eastern third of Texas, usually in well-drained sandy soils. So some people do retain that Freemania name. I sure do. Back to work. You probably think they use one of the many species. This is probably the rarest one that we have. There is, whenever I say that, some people say, "Oh, what about the endangered federally endangered African?" Tresses working up around Navasota, College Station area. That one is federally endangered. This one is not, but that one is. We know a lot more populations of that one than we do this one in the states. And there's only 2 populations remaining in those, and they're both roadside populations. This used to only grow in kind of moist, piney flatwoods, and just due to all the years where people weren't burning and we're just logging those areas there and not managing it properly, it totally eliminated that habitat. And persisted again. It's kind of like tree remnants. Maybe these mow growth. So in lieu of fire, that mowing actually will clear out all that competing vegetation. So basically, we have one site with about 18 individuals, and we have another site where this year I only saw 1 come up. Actually, out here earlier this week. Yeah, you can basically see the range of the species that's nowhere common, and it's obviously a little bit more widespread in Florida, but it's not common there. That makes it be like one site there, and some of those don't exist anymore. And many of these, mostly Texas sites, don't exist anymore either. So, because again, we only have 2, and they're actually both in Tyler County, so we can eliminate anything still remaining to anybody's knowledge in those other spots. But last year, and document my dog and I were kind of upset about that. We found one plant there where the top had been cut off enough to late fall. Remaining, all these 5 here, they just until they beheaded. So it's one of those challenges with the mowing. It's good for them, but they need to do it at the right time, and that's not always done on a regular schedule. We are working on this site here now with my friends at TechStot to actually get this to be on the time mowing. But this year, we again, and we went and marked them, but this time to try to thwart the mowers, take them down, kind of almost parallel with the ground, with metal stakes. So I'm hoping that as long as I can run over that to the mower deck, so just hopefully those blades will hopefully clear it, and the flowers will transition to fruit, and we'll get some good seeds this year until we can get some good time mowing on it. So we'll know in a month if it works or not. And some of you may have seen Laetris pycnostachya here, and especially there's some parts in Sam Houston National Forest that look like this, especially after a fire. They'll kind of get a little bit more sparse here until they burn again. But it's a great plant that I'm just surprised not enough people grow this or try to naturalize this in their if they have a suitable place in their property. I know Doremus Nursery out in Warren grows this, and they sell it like hotcakes, but and they're getting somewhere, but it could definitely be used a lot more. And I know they would be glad to propagate more if there was a demand. Beech, that's another thing that reaches its western limits here. It's kind of an iconic tree throughout eastern North America, and it's just one of those trees, I don't know, just a lot of people like. It's just a really beautiful tree to encounter when you're out in especially these really rich ravines with these acidic, moist, sandy soils. The fall color on it just takes on that really nice copper color. The leaves will stay on the tree after they turn. Basically, those leaves are dead, but I mean, you would never notice it when the light is hitting it just right. It's just really beautiful. And very important for wildlife as well, and also just for the ecology going on underground. There's a lot of there's a parasite epiphagus that has an association with the roots of these. There's a lot of other fungi and things that basically are mycorrhizal to this tree, and then just other associates too, including some orchids. And it's just a real key piece of these eastern woodlands that barely reaches its limit right in our area there. And then, did you know that we have a cactus that looks like this here? I was really surprised moving from Florida. I mean, I knew there were prickly pears here, but I always figured you have to at least go to out to the hill country, Austin area, before you start seeing some of these more hemispherical cacti. But I started seeing them up just north of Navasota on the sandstone outcrops there, and thought that was a pretty cool thing. Here's basically the range of the species, Escobaria missouriensis. Basically, it's most scattered through the plain states, has a kind of weird range in Colorado where it's found on both sides of the Rockies and then down into northern Arizona. But then you can see it gets down in our area here. It's not officially recorded from Montgomery County, but there is one site here. It's a little bit different than most of the other sites. Again, you mostly find it on the sandstone outcrops here, but this particular site is just a really well-drained kind of dry clay bank where it just receives the drainage it likes. But yeah, it's just kind of neat that we have this non-prickly pear cactus reaching its southwestern limits in our area here. You may ask why it's considered Escobaria missouriensis when it doesn't occur in Missouri. It's named after the headwaters of the Missouri River. And then back to another DYC yellow composite. We have one of the black-eyed Susans. Probably looks like all the other black-eyed Susans at first glance, but you can see this species is kind of special because we have this one little fragmentary range here in East Texas, which includes Montgomery County, and you can see it's just very strange how it just has these little kind of patches going up into where it's a little bit more widespread up there in Missouri, of course, and Arkansas. This missouriensis is actually from Missouri, but this one you really have to tell apart, mostly due to the foliage. And it'll have another kind of low basal rosette that is kind of stolen enough for us to form colonies. But the main thing about it is it's only found very specific to Fleming Formation outcrops here. So very, very specific to one geological formation. So basically it follows that geology and where it's exposed in our area of East Texas, which is, I think, kind of cool. And then everybody likes bluebonnets, but we do have other legumes that are blue here. I always thought this was interesting, not just because it's a really beautiful flower, but just looking at its range, it gets all the way up into Minnesota, reaching its, again, another species that reaches its southwestern limit in our area here. It is kind of spotty where you find it, really likes well-drained conditions, either sand or kind of gravelly areas. So you do have to look in the right spots for it, but when it blooms, it's spectacular. It's actually a pretty small plant. It'll have these kind of, the leaves look kind of like bluebonnets, but they have these, you can kind of see them there, these silky hairs on them, give it kind of a silver sheen. But, neat plant to go look for and find. And then one of the coolest things I never knew existed until I moved to Texas. Y'all are familiar with the spider lilies that grow in ditches and other wet areas around here. Some people call them ditch lilies. But there's this one here, which when I was at the John Ferry Garden, they had this patch of them growing up by the front gate. These were some salvaged up near Navasota when they widened Highway 6. And it mystified me because I've never really been into spider lilies that look the same to me. We had some rare ones in Florida where I'm from that were interesting. But it just perplexed me that they were growing this on this totally dry, sun-baked mound that received no irrigation at all. When I was new spider lilies, it was needing a lot of water. but yet every time I walked by, they were looking great. They would never wilt, even with months of no rain. And the kind of blue color you see, that's not just the photograph there, that's the actual color. They're pretty blue. And so I didn't know of Hymenocallis yuli at the time, and it's still a debated name. But basically what it does is in spring, it is a bulb, so it'll basically produce this foliage in spring after the frosts are done. And it'll just look like this until late May, early June, when it really starts getting hot. Then it'll go dormant. All the leaves will die off, no flowers. And then, so then you'll basically forget it's there. It's just a bare patch of ground. And then late July, early August, suddenly out of the ground, you'll start getting these bloom spikes here. No foliage, just the bloom spikes. Kind of like a surprise lily or hurricane lily, if you're familiar with those. How they just basically bloom without any before the foliage. And so I just thought that was the neatest thing. And then a little while later, the flowers open and you get this whole little colony of these spider lily inflorescences with absolutely no foliage, which just looked totally crazy to me. And yeah, so then I started finding these out in the wild here. This is basically basically found on high, dry, sandy ridges, basically throughout eastern third of Texas into western Louisiana, and there's a couple records up into southwestern Arkansas too. But sometimes you saw the blue foliage on that first slide there. I have seen some that are a little bit more green. Been collecting from throughout its range and getting the variability there and sharing this around just because it's a xeric spider lily that behaves really interestingly. And usually everybody I introduce this to gets pretty impressed with it if they're nerdy enough. But I think it's definitely something that should be grown more. And yeah, I mean, they're basically, each of those inflorescences is about 3 feet tall. So pretty impressive too. And then just some other oddities. This one, Spigelia texana, it's considered a fairly rare plant in Texas. You can find it common at certain sites, but still it's a Texas endemic to the kind of coastal plain around basically from about like Liberty County all the way down to, I think like down towards Corpus Christi area, but just very spotty where you find it. There's no official record from Montgomery County, but I have seen it in 2 places. It's kind of a I think a plant a lot of people overlook because the flowers aren't produced very often. So it's oftentimes grown mixed in with other little ground peppers. But that's another thing I've collected a rare specimens of, so it will be officially documented from the county here soon. So just wrapping up, I mean, I basically do a lot of conservation work with these things, as I've kind of indicated, and there's just various things that are done. You've heard me talk about some of these things, and you may be familiar with this, but there's ex situ and in situ conservation. So ex situ would be preserving these plants somewhere else, somewhere where they're not growing, either in cultivation, at a botanic garden, or just some other safe site, basically. And there's merits to that. Some people don't like moving plants like to other parts of the country, other parts of the world, and there are risks with that in terms of moving diseases or pests and things like that. So you got to do it the right way. But I used to actually work in, I used to manage the forest pathology lab at the University of Florida, and that's where it really became apparent the importance of getting plants other places, because there have been instances where a disease will be introduced, usually an exotic disease from some other country. It'll wipe out a plant in its natural habitat, but at least you got it backed up somewhere else. And so that's what a lot of conservation groups are working on now, trying to get as much genetics of usually the less common plants backed up in other places. Seed banking is a good way, but not all plants can be seed banked. I work with the Global Conservation Consortium for oats. You can't preserve acorns because they dry out very quickly. So we've got to more build these living collections in other safe sites, usually botanical gardens around the world. But you can also do in situ conservation, basically preserving where they grow, including restoration. Sometimes, like with our lady slipper orchids in East Texas, we're growing out a bunch of those so that we can reintroduce those to some of the ravines there. And otherwise, just conservation genetic material. A lot of people don't think about that. Yet another thing I do, I work for Global Genome Initiative, which is basically amassing genetic material, just basically tissue of these plants, usually some leaf tissue, getting them preserved in freezers, biorepositories, so that if any researcher wants it, they can basically go online in this database and basically request this material rather than mounting some expedition to Texas to collect something, or Borneo, or wherever that plant may grow. So it's basically facilitating things like resolving a lot of those name issues that I was talking about earlier. It's making it easier for scientists to be able to learn from these. And we're working on all these plants and conservation concern too, getting this genetic material backed up before they're gone too, not just seeds and living material, but also material that's preserved to a quality where you can extract DNA from it and research it further. So I talked about all the other stuff. I really want to emphasize a lot of people, it's interesting, a lot of people in horticulture, especially in the botanical gardens world, don't like you all growing native plants. And I thought it's ridiculous. There's a lot of issues where basically they fear people moving things around, and if you're not growing local source stuff, it may contaminate relatives within that area. Like if you move a hibiscus from one spot to another spot and there's no native species there, it may mix, which in some cases, yeah, it can be a legitimate concern. But I've basically found that private plant collectors are the best stewards of conservation as opposed to botanic gardens, because I've seen so many botanic gardens conservation programs that are going wonderfully, eventually just fall out of, just disappear. Oftentimes it's just a matter of board of directors changing and wanting to go a different direction. It's hard for conservation programs to generate funds for the garden, so oftentimes it gets on the chopping block, unfortunately. But get them in private hands. There's a lot of passionate people like you all that will keep these things going. So it's definitely a valuable thing for everybody who wants to be able to grow this stuff, to be able to grow it. I wouldn't be where I was if I wasn't able to grow rare plants when I was a kid. I mean, that was really what fascinated me, just getting all these things from all around the world and learning from them. And then just putting my passion towards doing what I do here. So yeah, projects there. I guess focusing more on the uncoordinated conservation efforts. I don't get paid for everything I do. But when I'm out, I just love to be out. If I see something, there's seeds on it, it's something of importance, I'll grab it and I will get it around to someone. Putting my own money into this, because I mean, that's what we did with that orchid site I mentioned at the beginning there that was going to be destroyed there. Nobody was paying me to do that. Can't help it. But yeah, I think it's my last slide here, just kind of a sneak peek of how the orchids are produced in test tubes, basically. They don't really, these are basically the seeds after they've been sown on this media within the Petri dish there that has nutrients in it. And basically they'll look like that initially. That's all basically mostly roots, even though it looks like spaghetti or noodles or something. And then eventually they'll, once they're kept under light, they'll produce their first true leaves, and then they'll be extracted from that nutrient media and adjusted to normal soil where they can become a plant. But this is the most efficient way of growing these orchids en masse, and then rather than, you can't just sprinkle some seeds on some soil and expect them to germinate in most cases. You gotta really do it in the lab to get a good yield here. So that's what the folks at Longwood Gardens are doing with our native orchids and orchids from around the world. They're great facilities, and it's all coming back here too. So again, maybe we can get Pines and Prairies chapter involved with some of the restoration in this area here. So yeah, follow me on Facebook or Instagram if you want tons of botanical overload. I'm always posting from all my journeys, not just in Texas, but around the world, just in South Africa. So a whole ton of neat stuff there. In the recent month. But yeah, hope that kind of opened your eyes to some of the things that we have in our own backyard here. With it was hard to narrow down some plants here to have it within a good time frame here. There's so many more oddities and things that are out there that I could have thrown in as well. Maybe we can do a part 2 one day, but yeah, hope you enjoyed it.
What drew you to Texas from Florida?
I came out here to become the first director of the John Ferry Garden when that was transitioning from private to public. So I was there for 6 years. And then out on my own now, just doing botanical and horticultural consulting.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Right.